Ready for some serious heat? This one's about to get dirty, and trust me, you won't want to blink. What happens next is pure temptation, and it's about to get wicked. Stay with me, it's about to get wild. Hello, I'm Ext. Begin by liking the video, leaving a comment, and proceeding with the lesson. Support the channel by subscribing if you find the summaries interesting.
She and her partner were out on a date. She was unaware that her aunt had entered. Therese claimed to be sleeping after hurrying her lover up her skirt. She was unaware of her aunt's. Her lover had become lustful for her arrival. He moved slightly beneath the dress. Therese made an inexplicable look as a result. The aunt gave Therese a massage since she believed she was feeling ill. Therese was unable to refuse her aunt at this time. The only thing she could do was to control her excitement. After her hands, Therese was having a great time. The aunt even took pride in the fact that she was genuinely quite skilled at it. She was unaware that the one who was truly talented was the lover wearing Therese's clothes. Therese, who was young and attractive, was compelled to wed a dull and physically frail guy. The suppressed Therese eventually met the man of her dreams. It's unfortunate that this man's arrival is both her good fortune and the catastrophe from which she is unable to flee. France in the 19th century is the setting for the story. Father of Therese was a seafarer. In Africa, he was always occupied. Therese's father was too busy to care for her after her mother passed away. Thus, he left Therese with Madame Racan, Therese's aunt, and his sister. Every month, Therese's father sent them a small amount of money, but he never returned. Camille, her aunt's son at the time, had been ill for years and was extremely frail. Raquin loved him, and maybe that was because he was weak. To look after him, she even permitted Therese and Camille to share a room. Thus, the years passed. They had both matured. Therese was graceful, lovely, and young. Camille was still ill and fragile, and she was slender and pale. Therese heard a farmer cutting his lawn one day. Therese's heart skipped a beat at the farmer's powerful physique. The desire fire started to flare. Her body felt as though an electric charge was flowing through it. She abruptly requested Camille to kiss her when she saw her. However, Camille and Therese had been living together since they were young, and he now only felt love for Therese. No sign of that sort of longing was present. Therese felt really let down. Her ideal lover was obviously not Camille. Therese learned of her father's death in a shipwreck that same day. Therese lost both her money and her optimism about the future. Therese was hesitant in every manner when Aunt Raquin proposed to Camille, but she lacked the bravery and strength to say no. She was now on her own and reliant on Camille and her aunt. They relocated to Paris after getting married. With the assistance of a close friend of his mother's, Camille was able to secure employment at a corporation. They rented a house just on the street. In order to provide for the family, Raquin also intended to build a store. The house was located in a little alley. It was as gloomy and melancholy as Therese's life at the moment, as dank and dark as a dungeon. And we with Camille. At work, he was frequently harassed. He frequently visited the zoo alone. He had no interest in what transpired between a husband and wife, and he was like a child who never grows up. Therese felt like a widow because of it. Then one day, Camille introduced Laurent, a man. Camille had known Laurent since she was a little girl. He was now employed by Camille's business. He was a good-looking man who enjoyed painting. At his core, he was somewhat cynical. Being a painter had always been Laurent's dream. Then Laurent was asked to paint a portrait of him by Camille. Laurent often visited Therese's home for this reason. Laurent had a flamboyant personality. He spoke anything, including discussing his sex experiences in front of Therese in a somewhat fantastic and audacious manner. Therese's heart ached with every delicate syllable. I'm not sure if he did it on purpose, but he depicted Camille as a weak, depressed man with hemorrhoids on his face. Camille, however, adored it. Given that it truly captured Camille's essence, they believed Laurent to be a genius. Art is meant to accomplish that. At the same time, Laurent unwittingly stoked Therese's desires. Laurent was well acquainted with ladies. Therese's underlying melancholy immediately became apparent to him. After that, they started seeing one another covertly and taking delight in unwinding. It seemed like Therese's life had just begun. As her eyes glowed, she started to lose contact with her spouse, Camille. Instead of sleeping next to her spouse, Therese would like to spend the entire night sitting on the edge of her bed. Because physical pleasure was no longer the focus of her relationship with Laurent, they had developed a deep and growing affection for one another. Their inseparability grew stronger. After some time, Camille made the abrupt decision to go back to the country. He became seriously unwell due to the conditions in Paris. Naturally, Therese did not want to go. For the benefit of the store and her husband's job, she pushed him to remain in Paris. But Camille had already made up her decision. "This is an order," he stated in the tone of the family leader, not a plea for counsel. Therese was feeling anxious now. In the night, she visited Laurent. Therese now prefers death to losing him. Laurent, however, had a thought. He intended to accidentally kill Camille. Laurent's statement startled Therese. She didn't say yes or no. However, at this point, the one certainty she had was that she and Laurent would always be together. Camille unexpectedly offered Therese a flower one day. Camille had never been that sentimental before. Therese was taken aback. They all went on a picnic together. He lied down on top of Therese to have a short break, as Camille was worn out from strolling. Laurent became extremely envious of Camille's actions, and his urge to murder only intensified. Then, Camille proposed taking the three of them out on the lake on a boat. Therese was reluctant to board the vessel. Laurent, she believed, had decided Camille would be in trouble if she boarded the boat. However, following a mental battle, Therese accepted Laurent's choice. Therese's conscience and reason were overpowered at that moment by her need to protect her love. This lovely lake was the scene of a murder. There was no turning back as the boat entered less crowded waters. The silence was broken shortly after by a clamor of cries. On the boat, there was an accident. Therese and Laurent were the only survivors. After the boat capsized, Laurent had a sobering tale to share. Camille instructed him to save Therese first. Camille had gone to the bottom of the river by the time he reached Therese. People believed it to be a tragic accident. Therese was upset now. Therese needed Laurent's reassurance to gather herself. If not, all would be gone. When Madame Raquin learned of her son's passing, she was saddened. The sky appeared to have fallen. After much searching, they eventually located Camille's body. Laurent felt nauseous after witnessing Camille's decaying body. The boundaries between Therese and Laurent vanished after Camille was laid to rest. They weren't content, though. Instead, their crimes haunted them, in particular Therese. She was in a trance since she watched her aunt scream all day. Her remorse only grew. Raquin would occasionally lose his temper and lash out at Therese, questioning why she had survived but her son had not. Therese couldn't be honest, so she blamed herself for Raquin's inquiries. Raquin also felt guilty about it afterwards. She claimed to have gone insane because she was simply grieving too much. The family was engulfed in sorrow and lost all happiness after that. Therese began to experience nightmares. She continued, thinking about the scene on the lake. She got quite sensitive. Therese and Laurent started spending less time together in order to allay suspicions. Furthermore, none of them wanted to enjoy their time together when they did meet. Therese even questioned Laurent about why he had to kill Camille, blaming herself. "At least they will be together for a long time," Laurent had to comfort her. Fortunately, Laurent, her son's best friend, had always been cherished by Raquin. Raquin made the decision to wed Therese to Laurent at this time based on the counsel of others. She even left the store and other assets to them both in her will. The only two people who could now support her were Therese and Laurent because she had already lost her son. Laurent and Therese, of course, were overjoyed. At last, a new life was starting to beckon. However, it wasn't that easy. Raquin's bedroom now features Camille's painting. Every time Therese saw Camille's face, she felt awful and guilty. Before he passed away, Laurent still had the scar from Camille's battle on his neck. For them, the portrait and the scar turned into nightmares. Therese became acutely aware that she could no longer be with Laurent in the same manner. She kept thinking about the sight on the lake. Camille's last throes, Laurent waving his oar. She was encircled like a ghost by those terrible pictures.
The life of Therese was eclipsed. Even the tone of her existence was influenced by these factors. One of the things I want to mention about this piece is Raquin's mental state started to worsen. She began to grieve for her son's passing and frequently sensed his presence. Raquin had a stroke and passed out in the middle of her severe mental suffering. And so there's a lot that goes into Terminator 3. And I wrote it kind of, she was confined to bed. The pair had to assume responsible for her care from that point on. For a while, it was the case. Laurent was yet to realize his dream of painting. He had sometimes neurotic Therese and disabled Raquin. Their lives turned out to be the complete reverse of what they had imagined. There was absolutely no joy. In particular, Therese, sometimes she would ramble on about murdering Camille on the lake. It began arguing frequently and accusing one another of being responsible for Camille's passing. Raquin overheard their conversation during a dispute. At last, the truth was revealed. Fortunately, Raquin was speechless and paralyzed. They didn't cause the aunt any trouble. Raquin then attempted to write with her weak hand during a party. Her goal was to identify Laurent and Therese as Camille's murderers. However, she was only able to write their names. The reality was unknown to her pals. They believed Raquin wanted to express gratitude to Laurent and Therese for looking after her. Therese became more and more concerned, even though they got away with it. One day, she feared their wrongdoing would be exposed. Therese made the decision to leave the area. She harbored a great deal of animosity toward Raquin. Therese had despised her aunt since Raquin had made her marry Camille. Therese's hatred for those who had controlled her fate grew as her life deteriorated. She attributed her offenses on Raquin's meddling. Nevertheless, Therese was unable to alleviate her guilt. She started having orgies and allowed herself to forget her history while intoxicated. Her friendship with Laurent soured during this period. She held Laurent accountable for the damage he had caused to her life. She felt guilty and angry every time she saw Laurent. Raquin's friend then happened to stop by one day and saw what Raquin had written. It revealed the truth. Camille had been murdered by Therese and Laurent. Raquin's friend was so terrified that she rushed outside and dialed 911. And then later on, Therese also became aware that she had been exposed after seeing Raquin's writing. Therese no longer placed any guilt on Raquin. Rather, she begged for pardon while feeling guilty. Now that everything was apparent, the cops will soon be on the scene. Laurent and Therese were both prepared for the last moment at this point. Together, they made the decision to bid the world farewell. Raquin was brought to the Seine's banks. Therese and Laurent shared their hearts with one another one final time before they passed away. Death takes everything away, regardless of their happiness or misdeeds during their lifetime. And that concludes the film.